All right, wanted to introduce our first speaker, Susan Hua. So she's going to talk about a little bit more on making sense of the Teochew college graduates and their language maintenance as a result of enrolling in higher education. So that's the title of the presentation. So just a quick bio of Susan. Pronouns are she, hers, identifies as Teochew Chinese American and a daughter of refugees of the Vietnam War. Originally from Massachusetts, Susan currently lives in Aurora, Colorado, where she serves as a college readiness program manager for the Title V grant at the Community College of Aurora. Susan is a doctoral candidate in the Education Administration Higher Education program at the University of Hawaii, Manoa College of Education. Her research focuses on engagement strategies and supports of the Teochew students and bilingual students of less commonly taught languages, LCTLs, in higher education. So give a virtual round of applause to Susan.
Like, where's the mute button? Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Hua, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm so excited to be here today to just share a little bit about my research, which is making sense of Teochew college graduates and their language maintenance as a result of enrolling in higher education. I wanted to kick off with an acknowledgement of the land that I'm presenting from Aurora, Colorado, which is the traditional lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and Sioux tribes, as well as 48 additional tribes who have been forcibly removed as a result of colonization. I recognize these Indigenous groups as the ancestral and current stewards of the land and pay my respects to the leaders and people who continue to fight for justice on unceded land. So just a little bit about myself. As you just heard, I identify as the daughter of refugees of the Vietnam War, as well as Teochew Chinese American. I'm also currently serving as the College Readiness Program Manager for the Title V team at the Community College of Aurora. I grew up in a very white town in Massachusetts, and so that really shaped the way that I experienced language and identity growing up. And so this dissertation research came from reflections of my own experiences with language, especially as I moved further away from home. I really want to focus on bilingualism in higher education and understanding how speakers of less commonly taught languages, or LCTLs, are able to maintain their language in a college setting, given the lack of instructional spaces. So with that, in my study overview, my committee really encouraged me to focus on my own people, which was really, really great. I had originally wanted to look at any speaker of LCTLs, and they were like, you know what, that's a huge range of people. So just narrow down because your people are important. So just to contextualize, if you didn't know, Teochew are from the Bioswa city or Teochew in the Guangdong province of China. Just given the history of the Teochew folks, there were two main waves of displacement. And so the first happened in the early 1900s, where war and environmental factors led to displacement into Southeast Asia. The second wave came around the mid to late 1900s. And so the Vietnam War, the rise of the Khmer Rouge regime, and that really led folks from Southeast Asia into places like Australia, Europe, various parts of the United States, and I'm sure there are other parts on the map that are not marked as well. Studies of K-12 students have demonstrated that language maintenance plays a large role in the identity formation of a person. And so this has implications for Teochew speakers, just given the wide range of the diaspora, as well as the lack of opportunity to use language outside of family and your separation from family while in college. And so just to quickly go through my literature review, there were four main themes that emerged from my literature review that really pointed to how structural and social racism impacts Asian Americans and diasporic identity development, as well as language use within immigrant families. There also was an emerging theme in terms of how important higher education was in terms of setting a space for Indigenous and heritage language revitalization movements. And so the conceptual frameworks that I used really pointed to the significance of study for me. And so bridging Yaso's community cultural wealth, as well as Strayhorn's sense of belonging, I really want to emphasize how having linguistic and familial wealth was really a big contributor in how a student can have a sense of belonging on campus. My theoretical frameworks were used to really highlight the lens through which I saw the data that I was analyzing, as well as the questions that I developed for my participants. And so together, Crenshaw's intersectionality and communication accommodation theory work together to really highlight and emphasize how power impacts language choice and the complicated identities for Teochew folks in the US, just given the migration patterns that their families come from. So with that, it led to my overarching research question, which is how do Teochew speaking students experience language maintenance while college going? And this was supported by 3 additional questions. The first of which is how do Teochew students make sense of their identities in connection to language? How do Teochew students perceive their interactions with family members after college going? And then how does college going impact language use at home for Teochew students? And so I use interpretative phenomenological analysis, or IPA, as my methodology. And this falls under phenomenological study, but really has an emphasis on details in the interpretation of one's experiences. As a researcher, my role was to make sense of how my participants made sense of their language maintenance experience. Some highlights for my methodology: I interviewed 25 participants who had self-identified fluency in Teochew and English, lived away from college, and then used Teochew as their primary communication with family. And they were supposed to have graduated within 4 to 10 years, really to give that time for reflection. I wanted to really highlight the pieces of my methodology that pointed back to ancestry and language. And so what was really awesome was I started my interviews with 5 phrases for participants to translate from English into Teochew to really emphasize the range of speech, depending on where their families came from. And so it was really awesome to see these dialectic differences of similarities and differences where they were saying things like translating how to, like I'm hungry, or I'm going to sleep, or I don't want to go to school. So that was really awesome. I also encouraged my participants to use Teochew in the interview process if it felt natural to do so. And they were able to share stories of things that their parents said to them when they were growing up, or just other pieces of history that really connected us through the interview process. And so those were 2 really, really great points that really tied back to ancestry. Some major themes and recommendations. There is absolutely not enough time to go through a whole dissertation review of themes, but I really wanted to point out some really salient points that came up for me as I was thinking about today's Scholars Collective. So I broke my themes into 2 categories, the first of which was framing the Teochew experience to really understand and situate Teochew folks in the United States. And then the second was really focusing on the college experience. And so with that, the 2 main pieces that I thought were really salient for today was really looking at Teochew as a family language policy. And so a lot of my participants shared that their family members or their parents really emphasized using Teochew only in the household. And so going as far as to say, which dad can't understand, and refusing to talk to them if they didn't speak Teochew at home. The other piece was Teochew as a connector to elders. And just given the migration and how they were trying to set up their lives here in the US, a lot of times my participants were left at home with their grandparents while their parents worked. This really forced them to learn Teochew as the main way of communicating with their elders and being able to identify what their needs were. But a lot of them also talked about how special that connection was with their grandparents and how their grandparents were oracles and storytellers, and how that really shaped their identities as they were growing up. Moving on to the college going experience, again, I was looking at language maintenance while they were in college. And what was really fascinating to me was this idea of the limitation of language. And so when you're growing up with a language that's mostly spoken, it's really hard to learn words that are outside of the scope of what you're learning. And so if your parents didn't talk to you about plant pathogens or about, microbiology growing up, you most likely did not have that as language as you were transitioning to majoring in things in college. And so with that, a lot of my participants shared that as life got more complicated for them, as they were going through college, they found less and less words to be able to identify these pieces with their parents in conversation. And so a lot of times their communication ended up being very surface level. And of course, the traditional check-ins of like, did you eat yet? How are you doing? Did you put on a warm sweater today? And so this made them feel like they weren't able to really share their college experience with their family. The second piece that really came up as a salient theme was mental health concerns and the inability to share that with family as well. And so beyond the stigmas that we know of mental health in API communities, they also identified that there weren't really words to put to mental health concerns such as depression and anxiety. And so overall, these two pieces really emphasize the minimization of their needs, but also their successes. And so if they're receiving an award for a leadership opportunity or put on a really great committee for research, there was really no way to share that, and they had to boil it down to really simple terms for their family. It's really important to also note that as they were finding the separation between family and discussing their college experience, they really turned to their faculty and staff to really try to find support systems from them. But because of how the monolithic experience of being Chinese and really only speaking Mandarin came up in various points in various settings in their college experience, they found that their faculty and staff didn't really want to build relationships past that point of being like, oh, you're Chinese. And so they really felt invisible and unseen in their college experience. This is a really quick summary of recommendations. I asked my participants to reflect on what would have changed their experience regarding their language use and identity development in college. And these were the different points that they brought up. And so, Chinese diaspora classes, exploring through Asian American studies, making use of cultural center spaces, and expanding requirements into STEM were some of the more salient points that came up for them. And lastly, I wanted to reflect on the question of what kind of ancestor I want to be. And I love this question so much because as I was doing my dissertation research, this actually came up in conversation with my participants. And so for me, it really boiled down to 3 words: mattering, power, and legacy. And so my family and my participants' families endured a lot of sacrifice as they were crossing the ocean to leave, poverty, war, just so much trauma that happened to them. And I really want my family to know that they didn't endure sacrifice just to not matter, and that their voices really mattered in terms of identifying as Teochew and being from a really unique situation. And so for me, this research was really about mattering. The other piece was thinking about power and how when you're in a power dynamic where you don't have power, you tend to be left with less pride for who you are. And so I really wanted to cultivate pride and reclaim power for Teochew folks where I felt like I didn't have that growing up. And lastly, I really thought about how I was so privileged to be in this position as a doctoral student to conduct this research on my own people, and how there really isn't that much literature in the grand scheme of things in terms of Teochew folks. And so this research hopefully is the beginning of a foundation for other folks who want to research Teochew people in the US and leaving behind a legacy. And lastly, I just wanted to share a heartfelt joisia or thank you to the RNS committee for having me here today, to all of you, my participants, and most importantly, my ancestors for building strong foundations for me to stand on. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Let's do a round. Oh.
Yeah, let's applause. Let's do it. Unmute. Say yay. Yay, Susan.
Yay, go Susan.
All right. Wow. Mattering, I wrote this down. So mattering, power, and legacy is what you want to leave behind. If we have just one question from the audience, we're going to try to do one question, but we'll have another kind of Q&A at the end as well. But is there any dying questions that we want to have Susan answer really quick? Okay, either unmute or looks like Dirk has his hands raised. So Dirk.
Susan, why does language matter? That's language, and we are at risk of losing language as an intergenerational inheritance. So why does language matter in the work as much as it seemed to in your telling of it? So.
Yeah, I was really struck by the literature I read on diasporic memories and how diaspora is defined by so many different pieces, especially when you're moving from your homeland and you're trying to find these pieces to hold on to your culture. I reflected on really not being able to speak to anyone outside of my family in anything but English, and how, we went to Mandarin school growing up, but because of the language differences, I really felt like I was struggling with learning Mandarin. And so I think for me, language ties me back to my family, and having that family foundation is so important, especially as I think about, building my own future and having kids and what that means for them to connect with my parents as well. And so it's such a big part of, who they are and how we identify. And it's been such a foundational piece of just really tying back to my elders and my grandparents.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Susan. And looks like you're going to be defending your dissertation on Monday, so we need a lot of celebration and positive vibes your way. So yes. All right, so to move us along, I'm going to introduce Carrie Ann, if you want to come and tell us who our next presenter is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. So I'm really excited to present our next person, whose name is Elaine Dolalas. Elaine uses the she and her pronouns and is a student affairs professional who resides in San Fernando Valley. However, historic Filipino town is forever in the heart of this writer, producer, and podcast with This Filipino American Life. A Virgo sun, Libra moon, and Scorpio rising, Elaine is happily trying to figure out the secret of life through writing, volunteering, and most importantly, avoiding cleaning her room, much to her husband and podcast producer, Mike chagrin. Today, Elaine's going to be presenting on This Filipino American Life, How a Magic Mike and Four Friends Combat Erasure.
Thank you so much. I've never heard somebody read that, and that just brings me so much joy that you did the whole Virgo, and I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Let me share my screen. So welcome to This Filipino American Life, How a Magic Mike and Four Friends Combat Erasure. My name is Elaine Dolalas, and I will be sharing our podcast journey and our thoughts on what kind of ancestors we want to be. So what happens when a newly minted PhD graduate, a public servant, a student affairs professional, and a nonprofit foundation's programs manager come together to talk story? You get This Filipino American Life, a podcast that explores the nuanced experiences of Filipinos in the United States. At iba pa. The origin story of TFL podcast stems from the four of us being based in Los Angeles with a history of community organizing work. And many times we would have personal conversations that would end with, that should be a podcast. And in turn, the should became a could, which is now our reality. So I actually asked the team the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? So the following slides are going to showcase that as I share our journey. So at the creation of TFL podcast, Joe Bernardo was the newly minted PhD graduate. He realized that pursuing academia wasn't their passion any longer. So they were like, I'm done. I don't want to pursue a tenure track. What do I do now? And instead, he has now since transitioned to an administrative role at a private university. And TFL podcast was his brainchild. He would have conversations with his friend and coworker, Ryan Carpio. So Ryan Carpio and Joe Bernardo were coworkers when they both worked for the mayor's office for the city of Los Angeles. Their conversations at work were the inspiration for what would be TFL podcast. Ryan is also someone I have personally known since I was in high school. So our friendship and chemistry comes through with our easy conversations throughout the show. So how did I get involved? So prior to TFL, I actually had two other podcasts in the past. One was where I would recap Babysitters Club books, yes, the YA series from the 80s, 90s, and reread them and talk about them. And the other was an oral history project where I recounted stories about my Lola, my grandmother. I had the podcast background, and Joe and Ryan knew that, so they approached me with the idea of TFL. I loved it and absolutely said yes, like immediately. And I just so happened to be married to someone whose nickname in college was Radio Shack, since they were an electronics hoarder. So it was perfect because we already had the equipment needed to record and host a podcast. And that is how Mike became involved with TFL. While he likes to remain behind the scenes, producer Mike, as he's affectionately called on our show, and is known to our audience as such, drops some of the best insight when we have our conversations. Our podcast journey goes beyond conversations between the four of us. Through our network and sheer will combined with cold calls, we've had conversations with guests that range from Nobel Peace Prize winners Maria Ressa, death doulas like Michelle Mondia, national data statisticians like Neil Ruiz, filmmaker Isabel Sandoval, academics like Mark Villegas. These episodes continue the oral history tradition of our lolas and lolos, while also challenging cultural norms that we may or may not agree with. Feedback received has equated the podcast to feeling like listening to cousins talk at a family party. We are like everyone's ates and kuyas, manangs or manangs, or because we're getting on in age, titas and titos. We are fully acknowledge this. So we share our stories, infusing humor, occasional singing. We are Filipino. It's a magic mic. Karaoke is going to come into play, and learning something along the way. TFL Podcast creates an inclusive community of Filipino and Filipino Americans, which showcases that we are not a monolith. Each episode released reveals more and more of the diaspora of experiences we share. We create a record of our stories on our own terms, innovating our own platform, paying homage to the ancestors before us, and paving a way for the future generations to create new lanes for themselves. Thank you for allowing me the ability to pay tribute to a few of our ancestors with this slide. This slide is very meaningful to me. It has family that we've lost along the way, student affairs professionals who were mentors, and people who were just guiding lights in our community and guided us as a community organizers. So I just wanted to give them their flowers and commemorate them. So yeah, that's them. And so I'm the emotional one on the podcast. I always cry. So this is my moment to shine because this is perfect. And you can find us at thisfilipinoamericanlife.com, listen on Spotify, Apple, wherever you go find podcasts. This is our Instagram at TFL Podcast, and Facebook, we're at This Filipino American Life. Daghang salamat to you all. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share this journey with you. I feel so blessed and honored to be have this audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elaine, for sharing your story and letting us know more about the podcast. It was beautiful to hear about how you acknowledge members of the community who have passed on. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. We do have some time to take a question from the audience. So similar to the last time, if you want to write your question in the chat, we're happy to read that out loud, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question out loud. All right, so we do have a question coming in the chat. Who is your dream Filipino guest?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I would love to talk to Leia Salonga because she's like my queen and hero. But also Joey Santiago, the guitarist from the Pixies, just because like that would be amazing. And then I have on the horizons somebody who I would love to get is Melissa from Real World New Orleans, because she's also like going to be on the new season. So if we could make that happen, that would be amazing. Like, yeah, anyone and everyone. I just love it. And like my favorite new guest would be like someone whose story like hasn't been told yet. Like if there's somebody who has a story in the middle of nowhere and then they've done something like really cool for the community, I would love to like talk to them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elaine. And hopefully we have some connections in the community to make this all happen. Next, I'm going to be passing it over to Dirk.
Let's do a quick shout out for Elaine. Everybody unmute and give her a cheer. Congrats, Elaine. All right, you're up, Dirk.
So, can everybody hear me and see me okay? So everyone, we're going to take a 2-minute stretch break. Let's take a 2-minute stretch break. If you're seated and you want to move if you're able. Otherwise, let's lift your hand if you're able. Stretch one hand this way, the other hand that way. Move your foot. Just rotate your head. Just do a little stretch. Love a good 3:30 p.m. Eastern time stretch. A lunchtime stretch for those on the West Coast. Yeah, so just do a stretch and take a deep breath. So we'll bring it in. Come back in a minute. All right. As folks are finishing up their stretch and accounting for the breath that they're taking, wanted to be able to introduce a little activity, a creative activity that I'm going to have you engage. Indulge me in, really. What we're going to do is this. We are going to, I'm going to put a link in the chat. It's going to have a password. You're going to download that little cheat sheet, and then you're going to wait for directions from me. So we're going to do that first. I want you to tell me whether you can access both the link as well with the password, because there was at least one issue. So here's the link coming in. The password is coming in a moment. And just make sure that you can use that. Yes. Thumbs up from anyone. Great. Yes, yes. Able to access the link. Perfect. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Heng. All right. Okay. So really, this activity is called More Than the Phenomena. And as a PETA folks, so much of who we are always supposed to answer to these majoritarian notions of who we are, who our communities are. So much so that we tend to lose some of the everyday. We tend to lose some of our rituals and our ceremonies. We tend to lose some of those intergenerational inheritances. And so this creative activity is meant to connect us with that story, and to perhaps provide one answer to what kind of ancestor do you want to be. I'm going to read out a series of prompts. I'm going to share my screen so you get a sense of the document, or maybe I won't, because I like to see I like to see faces. So basically, the document that you have is a PDF. It's a fillable PDF. Right? It's called More Than the Phenomena. The instructions are really, really simple. You will receive a series of prompts, 6 to be exact. And I want you to note down the first thing that comes to mind upon hearing the prompt. So, for example, what is your all-time favorite food craving? Detailed response for me would look like, it is the sweet deliciousness of a juicy mango, especially on a hot summer's day when no one can watch how messy I can get. Folks, what is really, really important is that in true APITA fashion, or I'm going to claim my roots in true Bollywood fashion, every single feeling needs to come out in the words. So if whatever that memory is, whatever it evokes, whatever bodily reaction it evokes, I want you to write that down. Hing, I know you're excited. So does that make sense? Any questions? Our fearless APITA co-chair is here. Dr. Desai. She's excited too, mostly about the mango. So, does folks understand the first thing that comes to mind? Let your fingers take over and fill it in again, okay? All right, so the prompts are going to come as follows. First prompt. Write down your favorite thing to eat. Describe some of its characteristics if you can. What is your favorite thing to eat? So page 1, paragraph 1, your favorite thing to eat. Describe some of its characteristics if you can. So that's number 1. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to let your fingers do the talking. Okay. Number 2. Think about your journey to the college or university you work or learn at every day. Record the stores, the parks, the landmarks you pass on the way to school. For example, I am from the coffee shop at the corner of Elm and Princess Streets. Think about your journey to the college or university you work at or learn every day. And if you haven't been on campus in a while, think about what it was. If you've never been on campus, think about what it could be. Number 3. Write down a favorite family saying. You can write it in the language of your choice. So if it means you want to write it in a language other than English, please go ahead. Bhai ye log kya kahenge, one more time. That was a favorite family saying. What would people say? So write down a favorite family saying. Something that members of your family have said, something a favorite person in your family has said. Favorite family saying. You pick the language. Okay, that was number 3. Number 4. I want you to describe an old toy or a keepsake that you will never throw away. An old toy or a keepsake that you will never throw away. An old toy or keepsake that you will never throw away. All right. Number 5, almost there, folks. Hang in there with me. Name that place you wish you could return to when you have more time and or money, and when COVID is not at play. Name the place you wish you could return to when you have more time and or money. All the details of what makes that place special. What it elicits from you. And then number 6, the last one. Write about a daily happening, something that is habitual, that happens to you daily or that you do daily. For me, it is hitting the snooze button at least 3 times. I'm not a morning person. It's the res lifer in me. Albert, you are a better person than I am. All right, so we had the 6. I'm going to just repeat them so you can quickly see what you got. First, write down your favorite thing to eat. Describe some of the characteristics if you can. I am expecting some delicious things here. Second, 2, think about your journey to the college or university you work at and learn from every day. Both the stores, the parks, the landmarks you're passing on the way to school. 3, a favorite family saying in a language of your choice. 4, describe an old toy or a keepsake that you will never throw away. 5, name the place you could return to when you have more time and or money. 6, write about a daily happening, something that is habitual and happens to you daily. Okay, are we good? Now what I want you to do is scroll down to page 2. When you scroll down to page 2, you will see the magic that is Adobe PDF that allows for whatever you had in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to magically appear on page 2 with the prefix of I am from. Now it might feel silly, but I want you to read your poem that you have just created. Complete with all of the stops, the starts, the feelings, the emotions. I want you to read it silently, saying the words I am from before each aspect that you've written. I am from the sweet deliciousness of a mango. I am from my walk on the way to school at the corner of Princess and Alma Street. I am from, just read it through and sit with that. And now I'm wondering whether we might have 1 or 2 of you share your I am from poems. Would you be willing to share 1 prompt? Let's have that. If you're not willing to share your entire poem, totally understand. But choose the favorite one that you would like to share. And use the words I am from before that. So Miranda, welcome.
Thank you.
Are you going to do the full thing or are you going to do one of them?
I'll do the full thing. I was just going to do one, but I'll go for it. And then I have to jump off. I'm sorry, but thank you. This is a wonderful exercise. I am from chocolate, dark in almost any form, but especially bar, truffle, brownie, cake, and also hot liquid. I am from, my journey involves listening to Poetry Unbound most mornings, driving down Ellis Hollow Creek Road to Stevenson, to Game Farm, to Dryden. I pass fields, crows, or seagulls, or turkey buzzards, the Dryden Rail Trail. I walk by the gorge and see what the waterfall looks like that day. I am from so uncouth. I am from my grandmother's anniversary ring. My grandfather gave it to her shortly before he passed. She wore it every day. I am from Kripalu Yoga Retreat, silent breakfast, time to catch up with old friends, hiking and kayaking, time for meditation, total self-care. I'm from meditation. This is a fairly new practice for me, one that has been impactful and I think may be transformational.
I have goosebumps, Miranda. Thank you so much for that sharing. Thank you so much. Kevin, your hand is raised. I'm going to invite you in.
So I clearly didn't go as detailed as Maria, but I was going to share just two of my favorite ones. I am from my Amma's kimchi fried rice with diced spam. It has to be my Amma's kimchi. And then the last one, it reminded me, Dirk, when you were saying, give a stretch. I was going to somehow put a picture of my puppies because one of them was stretching. So I am from giving hugs and getting kisses from my two puppies.
I have two of my own, so I can totally resonate. That early morning puppy love is everything. Anybody else? I invite you to share. Hey, good to see you.
Thanks, Dr. Rodricks. I'll just share one of my prompts was, I am from a blanket from the streets of Phnom Penh. It smells of my people.
You had me at that first one. Like so much memory, and the body carries a lot of memory. And I share this activity with you because you can also do this activity with students, with staff teams. And there's a part 2 to this activity, folks, is when we put you into we can put you into pairs and you start to create a we are from poem where you blend in the poems of each other. We don't have the time to be able to do that, and I'm not sure that everybody has done the activity, but I would leave it to if folks are interested in going into breakout rooms. Elaine, Jessica is on the ball with ready to activate the 2 breakout rooms if you want to, and it will be breakout rooms with 2 people to share your poems and perhaps kind of create a joint poem, gifting lines to one another. But instead of saying the I am from prompt, it becomes we are from, and you share lines and you say lines together and not. So if there is a desire to be able to do that, would love to be able to give you at least 5 minutes to read your poems to each other, share your poems, and do a little bit of combination work. And we won't be sharing, we don't have the time to share the We Are Froms poem. I just hope that you find value and power in community and in a recognition of memories and our ancestors, those who have come before and those who will come after us.
See, I did leave the co-hosts in the waiting or in the main room if they weren't up for joining a breakout room. But if you'd like to, I'm happy to move you. Just let me know.
I think some folks are not having joined or may need to be consolidated a little bit. So.
All right, everyone should be invited to one by now, but yeah. Did any of the presenters want to go into a room, or I know it's like also unwind time, so that's okay too.
We have a few pairs. We have room 2 pair, room 3 pair, room 17, 17 pair.
Ollie. Okay, so I got one. And, okay, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Get there for now. And wonderful job. That made that all the feels and like really good engagement from our audience. So very happy about that. Yay. When you did it for your dissertation, was it with your participants?
Yeah. And so when I was doing narratives, so I did life story narratives, right? So when I did life story narratives, this was the poem that actually started off their entire story. The I am from poem. And then I used some of the we are from poems in analysis. So we have to create that. And some of them are brilliant. It's like brilliant. Like when you're doing this, and it's so hard to mediate some of this in virtual. But when you're doing it in person and people are like writing, it's a totally different experience. So at my dissertation and defense, I actually did a live recording of what they're using their own voices, which was like pretty amazing. I also use it in my class for teaching. Each week, another pair comes up to do their we are from poem.
Oh.
So it's a because I teach a couple of arts-based methodology courses. So.
That's great. Oh my gosh, I will see if my class is open to it, and I will ask you for some permission before I do it. Yeah, it looks like a lot of the West Coast people had to jump off because lunch is over, but it's really good that we're recording, so that's good.
Susan, this must have been a really good practice for Monday.
Yes, yeah. And I'm doing my full defense practice tomorrow night in my chair's class. So that'll be exciting, but there's way too many slides.
We want to bring folks back in a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
Jessica,
usually
maybe tell them that we will bring them back
Sure.
in a couple of minutes.
I will do a broadcast message. I haven't tried this yet, but Zoom does this cool thing now where you can, I think maybe the host or the co-host, you can share screen to breakout rooms now. So that's like another way to get people's attention. That's like a little bit easier than the broadcast message. All right, I'm going to close the rooms and they'll have a minute to come back. We're just going to wait for everyone to come back in from the breakout rooms. All right, looks like everyone is back in from the breakout rooms. Did you want to end with anything, Dirk, before moving on to our next part?
No, please feel free to use this activity with folks. I think the more we can get folks connecting with memories and everyday activities that can kind of connect time and place, the more we will be able to honor our ancestors. So be that example for others. So thank you. Question.
Thank you. And you're actually up next to introduce our next speaker.
Wonderful. Well, it's my deep privilege to introduce my brother, Bhai Amrik Johal, a UCLA PhD candidate in higher education and organizational change. Amrik works as assistant dean of students at Irvine Valley College, South Orange County Community College District. Amrik also identifies as Punjabi Sikh, a first-generation college student and immigrant. His paternal and maternal sides of the family immigrated from Punjab to the Fiji Islands and England, respectively. His research focuses on bringing forth the Sikh experience within higher education research and practice, often an invisible area within what it even means to be Desi South Asian. So without further ado, I'm going to spotlight Amrik Johal, and he will speak on the influence of family on the educational trajectories of Sikh college students. So over to Amrik.
Thanks so much, Dirk, for the intro, and thanks, Dirk and Elaine, for all the organization and support throughout, and shout out to my fellow presenters. I've learned a lot from everything you've shared today, so thank you. My name's Amrik Johal. I'm a PhD candidate at UCLA, and my research focuses on the influence of family on the educational trajectories of Sikh college students. This was a really pertinent thing I wanted to include today before even getting started. So this past weekend, there was an attack on an elder in the Sikh community in New York, and this has become far too commonplace for the Sikh community after 9/11. So I wanted to call attention to this because this is what really grounds a lot of our work as Sikh scholars, is the fact that our community is racialized, misunderstood, and is often the target of hate crimes. And just to add some more background here, Nirmal Singh was attacked on the way to the Gurdwara, which is the Sikh temple, and he was attacked unprovoked, and it took hours and hours and hours for any police action. And Mr. Singh himself was apprehensive because of his immigration status. And so there are so many different layers involved, including issues like language. So I put this on here and dated it because this is happening far too often, and it continues to rattle our community and grounds the research that I'm doing due to that racialization and invisibility. And as we know, like fellow Desi and South Asian practitioners, racialization makes it really hard to report hate incidences and hate bias. And now transitioning into my presentation, at my institution of study at UCLA and institution of work, which is in South Orange County, the land I inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Kij, Chumash, and Tongva tribes. We pay respect to the Kij, Chumash, and Tongva peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora. And I wanted to shout out UCLA's American Indian Student Association, who continues to do a lot of great work at UCLA and does phenomenal programming in the month of October for Indigenous Peoples Month. And I just wanted to shout them out for all the labor that they put in into creating space for Indigenous voices in the University of California. So the problem my research has sought to investigate is grounded in the model minority myth and the fact that the Sikh community gets lost in the lack of data disaggregation as an Asian American subgroup, which all of us are much too familiar with. And furthermore, any race-neutral conversations tend to further unacknowledge minoritized Asian American subgroups. And lastly, following 9/11, and again after the election of Donald Trump, anti-Sikh violence has spiked in the United States due to rampant Islamophobia and xenophobia that harms our community. So Sikhs in the United States. So at the top, in case you don't know, the Sikhs are an ethno-religious group. So I highlight some of our core beliefs as a community, and want to call out important points here that the Punjabi Sikh community has been in the US for over 125 years and are among the first Asian immigrants to enter the United States in the late 1800s. And the estimation is that there's over 500 Sikh Americans across the nation. And we all come from the Punjab region of South Asia. And this is right on the border of present-day India and Pakistan. And Punjab was split due to British colonialism. And what you'll see throughout Sikh history is that there's generations of hardship and racism. And as a result, our community has remained really tight-knit and stuck to its ethno-religious identity, and really exemplifies strength and perseverance, which connect back to our core beliefs of one God, selfless service, and always living truthfully. So my research questions are, how does family influence the educational trajectories of Sikh American college students? What resources, networks, and cultural assets influence their education, aspirations, and trajectories? And what support and messaging do they get from their families? Theoretically, there's three large frameworks that I've fused together for my data analysis, and they are funds of knowledge, because I want to look at how household messages are transmitted within the ethno-religious community. So within a Sikh household, what messages are passed down and what funds of knowledge do students attain? The second is Bourdieuian theory, to look at how social inequality reproduces itself depending on social class. And SES pops up a lot in my findings, which I'll cover. And then everything is grounded in critical race theory, because that allows me to look at ethnic identity and religious identity and the intersection. So I draw also on Kimberly Crenshaw's work to kind of nuance what ethno-religious identity means for Sikh college students today. Sorry, this is going slow, so it's skipping my slide. Sorry, one sec. The existing bodies of literature. So I can break it down into 4 broad sections. There's a healthy amount of literature on early Sikh immigration, and this focuses on early 20th century immigration to the US. There's some literature on Sikh community development in the 1980s, and then there's a new body of literature that focuses on Sikh anti-colonial movements. And my focus is on parental and familial involvement, because despite there being limited research on the Sikh community, like I couldn't cover everything from a dissertation, so I'm looking only at familial influence, but there's so many places we could start. And then going back, so this is my dissertation study. It's qualitative and I'm using narrative inquiry. I have interviewed 30 participants, and that's all I'm going to interview for my dissertation. And they represent 8 colleges and universities across California. And for data analysis, I use thematic analysis to look at patterns between data sets, especially when participants are calling out family and like collegiate expectations. You're not meant to be able to look at every line, but I just wanted to show you that there's many first-generation college students in my study, and a lot of STEM majors, a variety of years in school, and then I have a handful of transfer students that represent different community colleges and universities in California. And then the key factors, sorry, it skipped again. Okay, so the key findings. So from my study, there were a couple of really salient points that emerged from the interview transcripts. Clearly for participants, their family sacrifices in immigrating to the United States drove their educational pursuits. So many participants shared that due to their parents' and grandparents' sacrifices to leave their home country and come to the United States for in search of better opportunities for their kids, that's what was the catalyst for them to want to pursue higher education. So it's kind of built into their family's emigration narrative from Punjab to the US. And if we dive deeper, Sikh immigration from Punjab is tied to socio-political events and anti-Sikh bias and violence. So during those peaks, there was a huge exit of Sikhs to North America. So that matches participants' parents' immigration to the United States. The second is college expectations. So often when we talk about Asian American college expectations, there's stereotypes that are out there, especially with the different publications that reference like Tiger Mom and Tiger Parenting, but it's much more complicated because that doesn't look at social and cultural factors that influence college expectations. So participants in this study felt the expectation to go to college as their parents were wanting greater social mobility for generations to come. So college expectations were embedded into their upbringing. Emotional support was a really significant finding because it's really tied to Sikhi, which is Sikhism. So participants would share that their parents would provide emotional support by quoting different religious experts from excerpts from Sikhism. And lastly, informal versus formal support. This matches other literature on Latinx family influence on college trajectory. For second-gen students, they're getting much more formal support with college applications and college tours. However, the first-gen students in this study are getting a lot of informal support, which is like more moral support and encouragement. So that was another interesting dichotomy because gen status matters. And then if we add a critical analysis here, which is really important, these were key factors that really added nuance and complexity. Gender, so specifically female and male students, heard different expectations of them from parents and grandparents, including supporting elders and like if they had a grandparent at home. Immigration status was also a factor as like the recency of immigration and if the student was born in the United States also is a factor. I mentioned socioeconomic status and also generation status. There's many implications, but I think visibility is the biggest one in ensuring that there is a Punjabi Sikh present on college campuses and more visibility for students to get supportive services, knowing their intersecting religious and ethnic identities. So the prompt that we were to answer today is what kind of ancestor do you want to be? That was really hard because I never thought about myself as one day being an ancestor, but I wanted to first call out that Leah Lakshmi, she wrote this to kind of speak and highlight the queer community's experience. So as a heterosexual male, like I just want to call out that that's what the poem was about, but I'm doing this because it's part of the activity, but just wanted to honor what they were doing in their poem. These are my grandparents. So in the middle, you can see my maternal grandfather and grandma getting their Canadian citizenship after many, many, many years. On the bottom in the middle are my paternal and maternal grandmothers. Far left is my maternal grandma. She was building her home in Punjab after going back. So she was building and like making sure there was a legacy. And on the far right is my paternal grandfather, who was delivering a political speech in the Fiji Islands in the 1980s. So my grandparents have always been incredibly strong, and they're my ancestors. And if I could be just a fraction of what they are and what they represent, I'll consider life like successful because they've endured immense hardship and really sacrificed a lot for us to even be in North America. And then I end with this last photo. So this is the Harmandir Sahib in Punjab. This is the holiest Punjabi Sikh shrine. And I just wanted to call your attention as this is like our epicenter of ethno-religious identity. And it's a picture I took 2 years ago when I was in Punjab. And it really speaks to the service of the Sikh community and our like this centricity of who we are in every single thing we do. So I just wanted to share it with this group as well. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks again, everyone, for organizing this space.
Thanks so much, Amrik, for that presentation. So much there. It resonates when it comes to community being so at the heart of the Sikh experience. There's so many resonances that come across so many APIKC cultures that sit alongside that and can value that. I'm wondering whether we have time for a question for Amrik from our audience, and I would love to be able to invite you to either put your question in the chat for Amrik or to unmute yourselves and come forward and to ask that question about what resonated with you. Yes, so I invite you to do so. Elaine, Jessica.
Hi, Amrik. My question for you is, where did you find support to pursue the dissertation on a group that you know, like you said, visibility is such an issue, like on campus, away from campus, other groups? Where did you find support during this process?
As you know, Elaine, like the PhD dissertation process is very like individual and lonely. Like it's very isolating, and Dr. Rodricks, like you just finished too, like it's just really isolating at times. So I think really relying on my committee helped, because my committee, they do this work to amplify invisible voices and our leaders in CRT. And CRT is to extract why there's invisibility. So having them really helped. My advisors, Pat McDonough, and my committees, Rob Teranishi, Cecilia Rios Aguilar, and Danny Solorzano. So they really pushed me to like keep going, and they do this work. So it wasn't surprising for them. They were like, well, yeah, just do it. So they were really helpful. And I tried not to share too much with my family, because if we shared how much stress the PhD journey has, like our families would probably freak out. So I just kind of rely on my committee a lot, and they helped me a lot. Yeah. Thanks for
that's a power committee right there, or with those three. So and yes, like the PhD journey can be isolating, and the power of a supportive committee where you don't have to kind of translate this becomes so important. Translate the need for it, or why it's important to do this kind of research. Please join me in showing our appreciation to Amrik Johal, soon to be Dr. Johal. Wishing you so much joy as you continue to finalize your dissertation, and we'll be so ecstatic to welcome you into the pantheon of Desi doctors in higher education and student affairs administration. And with that, yes, make some noise. Make some noise. Yes. With that, I turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Aaron Pereno.
Thanks, Dirk. So hi, folks. I have the pleasure in introducing our next speakers, Angie Kim and Jeffrey Tsang. Unfortunately, they cannot join us live, but wanted to share their work with you nonetheless. Angie and Jeff's presentation is titled, Did You Eat Yet? Nourishing Our Mind, Soul, and Body as PhD Students. So great, connecting to our earlier thread in terms of navigating PhD journeys. A little bit about our presenters. So Jeffrey Tsang uses the he, they pronouns, is a first-year PhD student in higher adult and lifelong education program, and serves as an academic advisor at the College of Engineering at Michigan State University. Jeffrey was born and raised in Hong Kong and moved to the United States to attend Oregon State University as an international student. Jeffrey received his MED in Higher Education and Student Affairs Administration at the University of Vermont. Jeffrey's research focuses on the intersection of technology and higher education organizations, specifically the effects of artificial intelligence and big data in higher ed. Jeffrey is also the face behind the prolific food page, Jeffrey Eats on Instagram. I'll drop the link in the chat. It's really great. You should follow it. Makes a lot of yummy things. And Angie Kim is our other presenter. Angie Kim uses the she, her pronouns and is a 1.5 generation Korean American PhD student in higher education at the University of Michigan. Angie was born and raised in Seoul, South Korea, and moved to San Gabriel Valley, California at 12. Prior to UMich, Angie served as the Associate Director for Inclusive Engagement and Student Life at New York University's Silver School of Social Work and NYU Residential Life and Housing Services. Angie received her Bachelor's in Cognitive Science at the University of Southern California and Master's in HESA at NYU. Angie's research critically examines DEI initiatives under the conditions of neoliberal, colonial, and racial capitalism in higher education. Angie is also Jeffrey's roommate, the most important role. Follow Jeffrey Eats on Instagram. That was part of her bio. So I'll turn it over to Elaine, who will share the video that Angie and Jeff prepared for us.
Thank you, Erin, for introducing our presenters. So they sent in a video on their presentation, Did You Eat Yet? Nourishing Our Mind, Soul, and Body as PhD students. Just give me a confirmation that we are good on sound.
Thank you so much for that wonderful intro, Erin. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is taking good care and taking their allergy medicines and staying hydrated all around. We're so sorry we can't be at the Scholars Collective Live today, but we're so grateful for APIKC for letting us submit a video presentation. To get us started, Jeff is going to share a quote that grounds our presentation today.
Yeah, so I just got a new cookbook last week, Korean American by Eric Kim. And at the end of the book, there's a quote that says, "We are who we are because of where we come from. And one way to find ourselves when we are especially lost is to return to our place of origin, if only for a bit." And as Erin introduced us, we are both immigrants. I'm still in the immigration process. And I, arrived from Vermont and Oregon, and Angie arrived, from New York City, California, both to Michigan. And, so, cooking and eating is one of the ways we return home. And this is actually really important to me. The longer that I've been away from home, the more I want to ground myself in my home culture. When I left for college from Hong Kong to Oregon, I wanted to start fresh, leave my culture behind. I'm in the US, so, I was young, I was 17. But over time, I realized, how important my, Chinese and Hong Kong culture was to me. And, I've made a conscious effort to learn how to cook Chinese food, especially home cooked foods that you can't find a recipe for. And, that leads us to, what kind of ancestors do we want to be? I want to be an ancestor that, centers community. I want to leave legacy for future generations to build on. I want the future to learn and grow from our experience, but not be tied to it. And, I want to leave behind a legacy and community of care. But, tying this back to food, cooking and baking has always been a huge part of my life. It is how I created community in all the places that I've lived, including Michigan. And another thing I just started doing this year, to sort of like continue my legacy is, starting to write a cookbook. It's not just a book about, just recipes, but it's also, stories from my family to, tie in that aspect of it, because the recipes alone doesn't mean anything, but it is the stories that, ground those recipes. How about you, Angie?
Before I reflect, I have to say, as Jeff's roommate, I get to be the front seat and recipient of all the delicious food that he makes pretty much every day. So I'm very grateful for that. I think for me, as an ancestor in training, I, want to cultivate a generation that centers community care over individual production or meritocracy. One who knocks on their neighbors' doors and asks, did you eat yet? How are you feeling today? And if they're feeling under the weather, bring over a jar of Chang, which is Korean fruit preservatives, regardless if they are APIKC, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, trans, that our communities are nurtured by each other, right? And they're safe and well together. All my life, I grew up in a very hyper-capitalistic culture, both in Korea and in the US. And we were focused on our own accomplishments and just climbing the ladder as Asian immigrants. But to me, I feel like centering on community and centering on just being, I think community and being in complexity with one another, but also just making sure like our neighbors are fed and our loved ones are fed is one way to resist sort of the individualistic culture and the culture of whiteness that exists in academia that I feel like we both experience firsthand as doctoral students. And I think this topic to us was so meaningful was because neither of our research interests is directly tied to like Asian American communities. And we are also one of very few Asian American students in our programs. And so, as we, cohabitate together, it was important for us to prioritize like making our home sort of very intentional and by honoring our places of origin and our homes by cooking Asian food and just like nourishing each other. And so the couple of things that we do, we wanted to sort of share as like takeaways and how we sort of prioritize cultivating community care is just prioritize nourishing your body, right? Like eating comfort food from home, making time for movement and mental health care, and just making sure that your body, first and foremost, your body and mind and your soul are nourished and whatever that means for you. And really, before you start a PhD program, before you start your new journey, moving to a new place, like you really sit down and reflect on that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things like in the past year with Angie living with me is that I've learned so much about Korean food as well. And, eating is something that we don't miss regardless of how busy we are. So I think that is one of the most important things, out of like our first year in a PhD program is, eating is important.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing is, supporting, local mom and pop businesses, local businesses. Because we're in Michigan, we don't really have, a critical mass of Asian Americans, especially in the Lansing area. So it is really important for us to support, local businesses and be a good community member by asking them, how we can show support beyond being just, a customer. There is this Korean bakery that Angie and I, go to every week. It's a routine on our weekends. So that is how we show up in our community.
Yeah, and I think, the third thing is we're always, or at least like Jeff, I think firsthand, like he is always delivering baked goods somewhere, like around the town of Lansing, right? Around our community, our time, and we're always FaceTiming our friends. And I like to frame it as like in your community, like who can use a bowl of cut fruit, right? Like we associate bowl of cut fruit with this really homey feeling of someone making, someone checking in with us and knowing that there is a community behind you, no matter how much you're stressed or, how much you're not sharing like what you're going through at the moment, right? And so just sitting down and like scrolling through your contact list and asking yourself like, who can use a bowl of fruit today, and giving them shooting them a text or FaceTiming them or Venmoing them for some boba. I think those are ways that I think we show and try to cultivate community care in our own lives.
So these are some of the resources that we go to frequently, especially, when we are stressed or when we're just looking for some inspiration.
Yeah, so they're on social media, but they also have their own websites. And so the first is Korean Vegan, who does incredible storytelling around intergenerational trauma as part of the Asian American community, and does Korean vegan recipes, which are pretty rare. So definitely check that out. And then Nom Nom Paleo, which is another Asian American chef based in the Bay Area who does paleo, gluten-free, Whole30 Asian recipes, and Manchu, which is classic go-to OG Korean recipes, and she has very clear step-by-step videos and like where you can get ingredients and stuff.
And Chef Jung Kung, I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of weeks ago. And he's a third culture kid, similar to myself, also grew up in Hong Kong. And similar to the Korean Vegan, also uses, storytelling in his TikTok and YouTube. And then
and then the last two are Greggy Soriano is on TikTok, and they're an amazing Filipino chef and makes really amazing desserts and just has really great vibes and energy. And lastly is a resource not related to food, but I still wanted to share that has been helpful since I've been to, came to Michigan and was using it in New York, was like Asian American Mental Health Collective, and they have a database of Asian American therapists. And it's really nice if you're living in an area where you don't have a critical mass of Asian people, and you're looking for some mental health support. So we wanted to add that as a resource.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I just got a new cookbook. So Eric Kim, he also writes for the New York Times cooking, and I would highly encourage, those folks. I think in the past year, I've bought so many cookbooks, but they've all been, Asian American, Asian authors, which is really awesome to see. And maybe that's what inspired me to write my own as well, at least start writing my own.
And we invite you to eat with us, connect with us. If you want to connect with us over just to chat or you want to hang out, check out our social media, and email us if you want to talk to us about our research. We're always happy to do that as well. And thank you so much for listening, and hope you have a great day.
Bye.
Let's give them all a little virtual cheer, even though they're not here. Yay. Okay. And we'll have the contact info for all the presenters so you can follow up with them too. That concludes our presentations, but we still have time for discussing with our presenters. If you have a question following up on any of their presentations or just about their journeys as scholars, as people, you're definitely welcome to put it in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to hear and see you as well. To give you a little bit of time to think, we do have a first question for our presenters to start with. It is, what would you say to your ancestors about the work that you're doing? So we did ask you what kind of ancestor you wanted to be, but this idea of being in conversation with your ancestors. Who would like to start?
I'll start. I think I would have to explain what a podcast is to my family. And I would say the work I do is an online radio show, because that's how I describe it to my mom. She still has no idea what that means. But and I would say, and I talk to a lot of cool Filipino and Filipino Americans and share our stories.
Thanks, Elaine. That's great.
Yeah, I think Amrik talked about the difficulties of describing dissertation research and the process to family. And I connect with that so hard. I just tell my mom I'm doing homework all the time. And it's like so boiled down to like, yeah, I'm doing homework today. They thought I was taking an exam for my defense. And I was like, no, no exam, no test. um, I think I think a lot about those the idea of like cultural artifacts and just being so far removed from where my ancestors came from physically, and what it means to still have this language to be able to um, maybe speak to them if I were to go back in time. And so I think I would really just be thankful for all of my ancestors for really pushing language in our upbringing, and how we use that as such a means of communication, but also cultural connection as well. And so yeah, I would say just probably thank you to them too, for having this resilience as they've journeyed across oceans, across lands, and really setting a strong foundation to be able to do that. And thinking about my own role as someone who has so much privilege in this life that I have now, and what does that mean to pass on the resilience in the way that I can. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
I would echo Elaine and Susan. They like communicated that better than I could have. I think like just the gratitude and so what Susan said about gratitude, absolutely. I would just say thank you. And then from Elaine's point about just giving an update on what the HAPS is in 2022, I would do that too, like the current state of affairs.
Definitely. So, oh, good. Kevin has a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so even with the Jeffrey and my gosh, what was her name?
Angie.
Angie, and the three of you shared very distinct research and stories, and I would kind of like the first part might be a little bit challenged, but oftentimes we're kind of separated into like different groups within the PETA greater community, and sometimes we feel isolated, maybe feeling like we're the only Asian of on our campuses and whatnot. But I think there's a shared narrative that comes out from your stories. So even though we come from different backgrounds and experiences, how can we use your stories and narratives to connect, to have a same goal, if that makes sense? Because you all bring very different aspects, but how can you see it connecting with someone else, maybe from one of the presentations, or maybe someone else that you've worked with cross-culturally, ethnically? And kind of like the reason why this is coming up for me is like kind of when Elaine was talking about the podcast, I'm like curious, like, are there any other ethnic groups that are doing these podcasts? Can Elaine like collaborate with some of these other podcast type people? So that's kind of like the mentality of like, how can we kind of bring this all into one unified voice, if that makes sense?
That's such a complicated question, because I, as a former Asian American studies like major, and I have all these things, like there's a journey you go on where like you think of the diaspora and you think, okay, we're all Asian American, we're all vying for like representation for our community, and then within it you have to then you go down the line of like, wait, but like my community specifically is not being covered. Like I am here for representation, but then you're not talking about my story, which is not about like a me, but it's kind of like but wait a minute, you're not the people who are getting the shine and the flowers on TV. Like they're not representing me. I'm sorry. Like that's not it. I'm happy for them. And I love seeing people like on my screen. Right. But then if it's not like, if it's not a Filipino American, like I'll be like, well, that's cool, but like but then this is a weird way to put it, but like Filipinos are always on TV, so I'm always just like, whatever, like we're always there, like someone's always Filipino. But like if like for Susan, who's Teochew, like that's probably not going to be something she'll see, so that's like really difficult. And then for like or to see your community being talked about in a better light, as opposed to just always being depressed and like seeing these stories, like especially with like API hate going on right now. Like my bottom always drops when I hear a hate crime story, because I'm always worried who the community will be. And like a lot of the time it'll be as Ali Wong puts it, jungle Asians who get the brunt of of what was happening. Like Amrik pointed it out in his presentation today. And like, so it's just like, it's either you're South Asian or you're Southeast Asian, and then you're going getting attacked. But then you're just like, okay, but then we're all rallying against this, but can we rally on something positive too? Like, why do we have to always be like fighting for, this sounds so sad, but it's like my journey as a community organizer. Why am I always fighting for justice? Like I was a high school, college student fighting for these things, and I'm now like older student affairs professional still fighting for these things through through my students. And it's just like, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but what I'm trying to say is that as an Asian American, you always have to weigh the waters of the diaspora, and sometimes like dialing it down to like the specific disaggregation of your community is also like the biggest step in order to get your community seen. Because otherwise, like if there's nothing written about you, it's like you don't exist. And that is just like the biggest thing that my heart hurts when I think that, because it's like we always have to create our lanes for these stories, because we're tired of trying to get seats at the table. So we're just building our own tables. And that's what I think is important about this generation, is that we're learning to come into our own, that we don't have to fight for the tables, for seats anymore. Like, I'm not going to fight for a seat. I'm going to create my own table. And then I will invite everybody to my dinner and to my kamayan and to my whatever. Like, I would rather do that. So I hope that answers the question.
Elaine, but don't you think that's I'm here for everything you've just said, but that is also a very difficult intergenerational conversation to have. Like, right?
Absolutely.
Like when we are having a conversation with parents, grandparents, great grandparents who have fought so hard, it's what makes them very complicated and messy, is to have that honest conversation with tears, with love, that allows us to understand that creating that new table doesn't mean anything less. In fact, there's something more to it, if they only let us, right? So
yeah, that's the one I feel for Susan and Amrik as PhD students, because I am not in that boat, and Elaine as well, because the journey for you all is, like you said, very lonely, and it's hard to not be able to go to your family and ask for that support, because so much of our stories as API scholars is that you're doing it on your own for so long, and it's just like, and then you get to the point where you get to celebrate the fact that you're going to do your defense. I'm so excited for you guys, but it's just like, I wish that you didn't have to be resilient in order to be successful. Like, can't we just be a community that's successful? I'm tired of having to show off resilience as a positive trait, because resilience is just like what you do to survive. It's not, and like, that's something that I wish we didn't have to go through in academia. Like, you shouldn't have to do that.
This is why Elaine has a podcast.
other responses and reactions to Elaine's brilliance and nuggets of wisdom, pearls of wisdom.
It's because it's not research based, and I don't have to do a study, and I don't have to try and code anything.
It's funny, I was reflecting on talking to my parents about my study and trying to explain what I was doing. And they were very confused. And I actually, for part of my dissertation, I actually interviewed my parents to talk about their immigration journeys and transcribe that into my first chapter to open my dissertation. And it's interesting how far removed they are from their refugee journeys, but there's still this like inherent fear of like, my dad was like, oh, what are you saying in this? Like, don't say that, say this, because if the government reads your dissertation, like they'll be angry at you. And I'm like, what government is reading my dissertation, first of all? But like also, like, no, like you need to have your story told, and that's why this is important. I don't even know the original question from Kevin, but I think like overall, I think it's so important, especially when we get to positions of being able to encourage, study and scholarship, that we are encouraging folks to research their own people, because those are the voices that aren't being heard. And I remember early on in my literature review, I was like talking to one of my committee members, and I was like, I can't find anything. Like, is that even a legit study? And she's like, you're doing this because you can't find anything, and you have to center that as why you're doing this. And so I think just having this mindfulness across cultures, especially in the roles that we have in higher education.
I think, Susan, so much of what you're saying resonates with me in terms of, again, I can't help but think intergenerational inheritances, where representation is the inheritance that we have generated, that we've received from ancestors, but it cannot be an endpoint. It must be the place from which we begin. It must be the place from which we deepen, render more multidimensional the kinds of narratives, more intersectional. Like Amrik, like when you talked a little bit about, Leah Lakshmi's like orientation and their grounding of writing the poem. It renders, it doesn't flatten or reduce a Desi experience. In fact, what it does is it renders it more complex and multidimensional. And how do we do that? And how do we do that consistently, so that to the 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 13-year-old, or the 15-year-old watching, when they get to university and beyond, that they can imagine writing the next dissertation for our communities. If there's anything I would say to you is continue to break those barriers. One of the things I did in my dissertation was unapologetically use Hindi words in Hindi script to write and get the point across. Untranslated, did not care, and said, if you find yourself wondering what the word is, look it up. Like, I ain't translating it for you if you're outside of the community. So to find ways that kind of locate but honor the legacy of ancestors becomes really, really important. And there are ways to push it. And if you need support in how to sell it to a committee member that might be like, what is this? There are plenty of us around. There are plenty of us that will fluff you up, prop you up, and give you the language to break down those barriers. Because today it is you. Tomorrow someone is just waiting to see you do it, so that's permission giving for them. So more power to all of you for doing the work that you do and continuing to blaze and open doors for those that come after.
That resonated, Dirk, and thank you. And I would also respond to Kevin's very hard question. It took me like 10 minutes to figure out how to contribute, but I think the way we cite in our papers and who we cite is it's inherently a political act. So to create connection with each other, citing the right people that identify with the diaspora as Asian, Pacific Islander, Indigenous, and Desi could help create the connection, because there's all these canonical authors and researchers that everyone cites, right? But they tend to be white and male. So yes, I get that our committees might be like, hey, it's a good best practice, but we are at the keyboard typing, so we could also take the step to be like, who else in the field is doing it, to create the connection between each other. Yeah.
Thank you all, and sorry if there's barking. But it really helps, because even with what Elaine says, when I see people on TV or just literature, I'm like, oh, Korean. I'm like, that's me. but even sometimes that's not going to resonate with me, but maybe I'll resonate with some of the things that you've all shared as well in different ways. So I think just going through the dissertation process, eventually I got to figure out what I'm going to write about and stuff. We have a lot of researchers and practitioners. Sometimes we're the only Asian, so we have to kind of almost represent everyone. But I'm like, I can't do that. But there's I don't want to fail, our students and even staff and faculty as well. So hearing all of your responses of we're going to get through this, together as well. But it's okay to kind of learn from our identity and our experiences individually. That definitely resonates. So, hard question, but you all nailed it. Thank you.
That was epic. Thank you for all of that and giving me some time to reprocess that down. We are coming to a close of this year's Scholars Collective. We did record, so we'll be able to have recordings for those who couldn't make it. And for each of our presenters, we are gifting them a copy of Leah Lakshmi's book. And so we're going to send that to you. We're actually going to handwrite some stuff. So it'll take a while. I might hand deliver it to my friends on the West Coast. So maybe expect a little visit from me. And so thank you for sharing your work, sharing your stories. This Scholars Collective, it's sort of what we make it. And we really hope that you felt like we broke down a couple of the walls of academia and made some connections to keep sustaining. There are a bunch of things that APIKC has stuff to do and stuff to move forward. Dirk, Aaron, would you mind giving a quick rundown of our sort of announcements and APIKC stuff?
Sure, I can go first. So now that we finished Scholars Collective and there's been a lot of great energy around some of the narratives and stories that you've presented around wanting to change things up within higher education, one of the things that we hope to be doing as the research and scholarship team moving forward is putting out a proposal for a book. So for those of you who might be using the NASPA's Asian Pacific Islanders in higher education book, it's the purple-ish book. I always mean to have the copy to show. Maybe Elaine, Jessica, you have yours. It'll be celebrating 10 years, and we want to uplift and show, there you go, that book, and show the changes and the more nuanced conversations we're having about our community, like the ones that our 5 presenters have presented today. So we hope that, as things wind down in the semester or quarter and you find some time to for rest and respite, once you're rejuvenated, you can find time to submit a proposal. This more information will be available on our Instagram and social media, and we'll also send it out to our newsletter. If you're not getting our newsletter, make sure that you select that you want to be part of the APIKC on your NASPA membership, so that you can be getting the information from our co-chairs and our team. And I'll pass it to Dirk.
We continue to strike writing circles, call it a writing circle, an accountability group, whether you're working on a dissertation, an article, and we're looking at Susan, and I know that you're not writing the dissertation anymore, but if you're going to be writing from the dissertation, to be able to welcome you and to do whatever piece of writing or any kind of brainstorming. Writing can be many, many things. And so we have, at this time, we have 3 different slots that we offer. We will be putting out what our summer is going to look like. We are bringing some of our winter term slots to a close, but look out for our writing circles as offered through the APIKC. It becomes a supportive space for you to advance some of your work, but also to do it in a way that is accountable and with people who love, care, and can prop you up, because that's what this is about. It's about cultural production at its finest. So join us.
All right, I'll take the last one. If you want to get more involved with APIKC, you're definitely welcome to join our committee, the Research and Scholarship Committee. We're planning events like this, working on the book proposal, things like that, building up community of scholars. There are also vacancies in the APIKC leadership team. Quite a few of the regional reps cycled off because we do they make sure that not everybody has to cycle off at the same time. So if you are from any of those regions, 1, 4 East, 4 West, or 6. And we also have different sub-reps of Region 6, SoCal, NorCal, and Hawaii. Please let us know if you're interested. You can contact any of us on the L team or go on the NASPA engagement portal to submit an application. All right. I think that's all right. Okay. Thank you again so much to our presenters. This is awesome. Yes.
Thank you so much for being in community with us, folks.
Thank you.
Yay. Okay. We did it.
Quick question, and I know we have